So Jane from Berkshire asks, my 10-year-old has just been diagnosed with Asperger's and my world has fallen apart. What sort of life can he have, and is there any hope of a cure? Well, I've got Asperger's myself, and I've found many solutions within my life to be able to cope and fit really well within the world around me. I still find some things stressful, some things really difficult. I still find being in social situations challenging, and I still find any highly sensory situation really challenging. So, for example, being in a shop that's busy, being in somewhere with lots going on around me. But having Asperger's doesn't necessarily write someone off. So for many years now, I've taught parenting courses and I've worked with a lot of parents. And I've heard so many parents say to me, my child's been diagnosed with Asperger's and they've pretty much given up hope for their child. And I think part of that is because of the way things are talked about. Because you go and get your child diagnosed normally off the back of having lots of problems going on in relation to the child. So the child's struggling with lots of areas of their life and lots is happening. So it's the negative stuff that drives you to seek a diagnosis. If someone's doing all positive stuff, you don't think they need to go and have help. So you go and get diagnosis, but then when you get diagnosis, you get told they've got Asperger's, it's a lifelong condition. So essentially, what a lot of parents I've worked with end up interpreting that as is, my child has these difficulties, this is a genetic lifelong condition, they're stuck with it forever, that means they're stuck with these difficulties forever. And they don't look at the strengths. So people with Asperger's, now I've got Asperger's and I work as a therapist, which some people have said, well, how can you work as a therapist? You sit down with people, you work as a therapist, but you have Asperger's, so you shouldn't have good social skills and you shouldn't be able to easily interact with people. But I have this whole thing of lots of sensory stuff is constantly coming in. So I'm very observant of different information that comes in and of patterns. I'm very observant of patterns. And so people with Asperger's, because you notice patterns much easier, because you don't necessarily get drawn into all the emotional stuff. So I've attended lots of courses with other therapists, like training courses where we're all there to improve ourselves as therapists. And all the other therapists in the room will be trying to learn how to detach themselves during therapy sessions so that they don't get emotionally involved in the story the client is telling. I'm on the other end of the spectrum, where I'm sat there thinking I don't do any of that anyway. I don't attach to the story the client is telling. I don't get drawn into the emotions. I don't hear someone talking about abuse and think, oh, you poor person. Yet I have colleagues who do think that and have to try and keep that part of them shut away a bit so that they don't scare the client. Because if a client is sat there opening up and revealing something really emotional and really difficult to reveal, and something that could lead to the other person having a sense of disgust about it, if that therapist shows a facial expression to do with disgust, the client can clam up and think, I don't want to keep telling you stuff because you're judging and you're reacting in that way. So therapists undergo a lot of training to try to learn how not to do that. And someone with Asperger's may be very good at doing that naturally, that they just don't get drawn into those things. So they can hear the story and hear the patterns within the story without getting drawn into it. I'm capable of learning, and many people with Asperger's are quite high learners. They're very good at learning, as long as it's subjects they're interested in. So if that if your child can learn about communication skills, so for me it was learning about hypnosis that did it. I learned about hypnosis when I was a teenager, and that in the hypnosis books it talked about responding to the client, watching for minimal cues, so that's watching for subtle facial expressions, subtle movements around the eyes, subtle changes to the shoulders, all these different things. So I was learning this as a teenager to do hypnosis, but actually what I was learning was this is stuff that goes on in front of people all the time. Most people respond unconsciously and instinctively to it. I don't respond unconsciously and instinctively to it, but I've learnt to read it and to watch for it. So someone with Asperger's can learn stuff, they can improve themselves, they can develop their abilities, and they have lots of strengths and skills that neurotypical people don't have. They're much better at noticing patterns. They're much better at not being drawn into emotional content of things and to be able to think logically about things and look at things from a more logical perspective. They're very good at noticing fine details in things. So really it's more about how to channel that person with Asperger's, how to channel the child, how to help to teach them the skills they need to be able to interact with people, but to look at what their strengths are rather than their weaknesses. So you want to help them to learn coping skills and to learn how to improve their areas of weakness. So for me, I learned meditation, which helped me to be able to focus. So I'm already really good, as most kids with Asperger's are, at focusing on my subjects I like. I can focus on them and blank everything else out and be in my own world. But I can walk down a high street and get really stressed and really anxious because there's signs swinging that have light reflecting off them and flashing off them. There's bags everywhere that have jingly bits on that move and flash. There's dogs and things everywhere, and there's all this commotion. There's trying to dodge people, dodge pushchairs, have people starting and stopping and changing walking speeds. There's having the wind blowing and then irritating my eyes, having so many things going on. There's so much going on that can be overwhelming. But I can use meditative techniques to focus, to calm myself, and to make it so that I can just focus on one thing in my environment and narrow it down. And I started learning meditation when I was about 7 or 8 years old and didn't know it was meditation back then. But I started learning meditation back then. And so there are skills you can learn. You can learn to focus your attention, you can learn to relax, and you can learn breathing techniques. So you can learn the techniques to deal with the sensory overload, you can learn coping skills, you can learn what you need to do, so wearing headphones, wearing glasses, sunglasses. You can learn things that can help you with the deficits, with the problems that you face and the things that you struggle with and the anxieties. I can do public speaking because it's not a social situation. It's me talking to a room full of people and taking questions from people. But once the public speaking's over with and I'm down mixing with people, I don't approach people and I don't know what to say. So if people come to me, I can answer their questions, but I don't actively go out of my way to go to other people. So there are scenarios that someone with Asperger's is probably quite good at, and there are other scenarios they're not. And part of it is about how to learn the coping skills to fit in with the areas you're not so good at and to manage the areas you're not so good at, but focusing on your strengths and what you're good at, and trying to nurture that and help a child to grow and to develop those strengths and to praise them and make them feel good for those strengths. So it's not something that I think necessarily needs a cure. It's something that I just think they need to be looked at as they're a wonderful human being. What are their strengths and how can that be enhanced and how can they be helped?